I'm a fan of The Darkest Shore, which is super relieving because as much as I like the base game content, I recognize there are ways this could potentially go very wrong. Now I know what you're thinking. Weren't you done with YouTube, Rizzo? Well, I'll talk about that at the end, but for now, we've got a map to discuss. Before we dive into the depths of The Darkest Shore, I'd like to do a quick recap on what's changed since the release of WWII Zombies. If you'd just like to skip to my thoughts on the map itself, go to the timestamp on screen, or you can check the description for all sorts of timestamps. Since launch, we've received some balancing updates to the game's meta in the form of mod and special readjustments. Camouflage now depletes faster when firing weapons, thus strengthening its role as a defensive ability instead of one of offense and defense. There was a nerf to fully loaded, but a global overall ammo buff to make it less of a crutch mod, and Grenadier no longer doubles your jack-in-the-boxes. Personally, I feel that all these changes are for the better. With a game like this, it's important to have a healthy and varied meta, lest the game get boring, or worse, frustrating. Just look at what happened to the war meta when Saboteur was introduced. Is this hell? There's also been new mods. Just before the release of DLC 1, we got 8 new mods. I'm not too certain on the exact number, but from what I've tested, they're all well balanced and don't disrupt the meta. Although I will say Sustain Zone is really top tier. Recently, we got a massive change to the health regen timers. Previously, to heal from 0 to 100 health, it took 11 seconds, which, with the pace of the game, many players found to be problematic. But now it only takes 7 seconds for a full recovery. This is much more manageable, and it's a change I didn't even really know I wanted.
Oh right, and weapons.
We've also seen 8 new weapons added to the box's rotation, and a couple of them are even starting weapons now. And last but certainly not least, bug fixes. I didn't talk much about bugs in my previous video because, frankly, I didn't encounter many besides the supply drop glitch, which has since been fixed. Thank Christ. Along with the Red Talon XP exploit, progression issues, numerous out-of-map spots, treasure zombie duplication, the list goes on. What I'm trying to get across here is that the game is in a much better state than it was at launch. And with contracts and orders just on the horizon, I feel like that it's only going to get better. It helps that all of this is free too. I like free stuff. I am a millennial after all. Now that we covered that, I'd say it's finally time to get into The Darkest Shore. Per the norm, we're going to start with the things I liked, the map design and its general flow. A lot of people won't believe me when I say this, since I value story and character a lot, but the thing I find most important in a Zombies map is its map layout and flow. Okay, let's go on a little tangent, bear with me. This is something that Zombies has struggled with quite often. Transit, Die Rise, and Shall and Shuffle are some of the worst offenders. And I know what you're thinking. That's it? I thought you criticized Exo-Zombies for the exact same thing. Well, yes, but Exo-Zombies is much different. All 4 maps, in theory, are well designed, but solid design alone isn't enough. You need to take the map's gameplay elements into account as well. This is where Exo-Zombies, and the Beast from Beyond especially, messed up. Exo-Zombies featured largely cramped CQC maps and the most aggressive zombies we've seen to date. And the Beast from Beyond is just a balanced nightmare in every regard. There's too many gameplay elements working against each other. In Exo-Zombies, every zombie is incredibly fast, and most have special abilities that you need to account for. Problem was, these abilities didn't gel with the map's design and the other existing gameplay elements like bomb defusal.
A bomb's been planted on our ammo supply!
You need to be fast in Exo-Zombies. That's what the exosuit is there for, right? However, EMZs, EMZ dogs, and Goliaths can trigger an exo shutdown, which will slow you down. And since the zombies are roughly as fast as you, and the maps are cramped, and there's no sprint duration increase perk, well, put 2 and 2 together. As for Beast, to deal with ninjas, just don't sprint. Okay, easy enough. But then you upset that idea by introducing enemies that move faster than your standard walk speed, deal massive amounts of damage, and spawn in at the same time as the enemies you can't run away from. Now, how does all this relate to World War II? Well, game balance is where the Final Reich, Groston House, and thankfully the Darkest Shore excel. Okay, the Moishla kinda throws us for a loop, but we'll get into that later. The Final Reich's enemy balance was nearly perfect, with balance problems only manifesting in the form of bad spawns. Every enemy had specific weaknesses that an experienced player could exploit. The Darkest Shore may be smaller and more close quarters, but like the Final Reich, the map design itself flows well, is easily accessible to all types of players, the zombie spawns are well placed with multiple player movement taken into account, and the map offers quick ways to get around in the form of the minecarts.
Oh shit, look at that already! Possible boyfriend, spotted! Don't always gotta be up to the man to make the first move. Yeah. Idiot, what are you doing? You rejected me into a coma!
The minecart transportation system is easily better than the disposal tubes of Final Reich. as you can actually change where you'd like it to go and call it to your current location, much like the Mark IV tank from Origins. And lastly, the Pack-a-Punch method is very simple. I found it in my first game without looking up any guides. And I tend not to be very attentive when it comes to that kind of stuff. Like, at all. However, as I mentioned, the map itself is much more CQC than its predecessor, so it doesn't offer much in terms of kiting, which will disappoint some players. Almost as much as the fact that I just called it kiting. The last element of the gameplay that I feel is worth mentioning is the two new weapons that we found so far, the Ripsaw and the Pommel of Barbarossa. The Pommel is very simple. It's an area of effect tactical grenade that regenerates every 15 seconds. Nothing too special, but it's neat nonetheless. Then there's the Ripsaw, and I love this weapon. A lot. I've executed hundreds of zombies with it, and I still don't find it boring at all.
Come on, go up! Fucking marry your husband material, I'll kill you. Fucking kill you.
Maybe I'm just easily amused, who knows. The atmosphere and vibe. The vibe of the Darkest Shore immediately sets itself apart from the previous two maps, whereas Final Reich and Grossenhaus were very dark and focused more on the science of Straub's work. This map is actually quite bright and has more of a tribal, culty feel to it. The atmosphere itself is wonderfully creepy and, just like the Final Reich, has a well-executed build-up to said creep, although I don't think it's as successful as its predecessor. It starts off normal enough, with the players fighting off zombies on the brightest shore. Get it? Because the map's name is the Darkest Shore, but the shore you're fighting on is actually quite bright. But then you start progressing through the map, and the feeling that something isn't right builds up. You start finding headless Nazi corpses and strung up bodies, then the remnants of Straub's twisted works, and finally, once you progress through the quest enough, secret rooms dedicated to the Moishla's worship of their mother, the goddess of fertility, Nerthus. Then there's the fog, which I feel is very well executed and adds greatly to the atmosphere. I originally panned this on release, as I felt it cut down player reaction time far too much for a game where your success is based on how good your moment-to-moment reactions are. Turns out I was completely wrong and just not used to its mechanics. See, zombies will completely ignore you in the fog, provided you don't fire a weapon. This allows you to sneak around unseen, but unless you knew this prior, you'd likely just run around like a chicken with its head cut off, firing at everything that moves. It's what we've been doing for nearly a decade at this point, and it's worked out so far, right? What I'm trying to say is that the fog will screw you over if you're new to the map and don't know what you're doing, or if you fall back on old, tried and true tactics. Once you get to learn the map though, you'll be able to travel through the fog with no issue. However, there is one enemy that can see you in the fog, the Moishla. Let's talk about these demon spawns. The Final Reich scared you by showing these horrific perversions of humanity, but because the map has been out for 3 months, we were kinda numb to that bag of tricks by the time the Darkest Shore released. Then the Moishla comes along and does the exact opposite. It relies on sound and the implication of perversion far more than the visuals to scare the player. And I gotta admit, it got me more than a couple times. Because they only come out with the fog, you never get a good look at them. I hadn't actually gotten a solid look at one until almost 3 weeks after release. Because most of your sightings, provided you're not doing quest runs, will be limited to a twisted silhouette lurking in the fog. It plays into the classic horror idea that your mind's interpretation is always more frightening than whatever's on screen. And to be honest, I feel that the Moishla is perfectly executed in this regard. With the map's design, atmosphere, and general gameplay covered, I think it's time to get into the story and characters, which I'm just gonna preview, are my favorite part of the map. Like, let's just cast all professionalism aside for just a moment. This map's lore is fucking cool.
That's very cool. It's very cool. Yeah.
The main story takes place mere days after the events of the Final Reich, and involves the MFAA tracking Straub's movement to an island, with our heroes being tasked with apprehending him.
If everything goes well, nobody will fire a shot.
Then there's the background lore. I was very skeptical on how the implementation of pagan gods was gonna go, but it ended up being my favorite aspect of the story so far. I find the idea of the Moishla's devotion to their mother Nerthus fascinating, and that they're intelligent enough to escape captivity, worship, and seemingly even have cliques of their own, evidenced by the outcast Moishla that appears during the map's main quest. Their intelligence opens the doors to tons of possibilities. Are they aware of what they are? Do they have a larger plan, or do they just think in the moment like animals? Was this Moishla shunned by the others for being a non-believer, or did the others believe it was simply the will of Nerthus? We may never know, but it's something we never really seen before in Zombies. One final detail I appreciated was the outcast's fear and ultimate acceptance of death in the main quest. It adds a dark and slightly human element to these things we've previously only seen as monsters. That's my water tank again. Jesus fucking Christ, can I record anything? The increased character focus. This was one of my few problems with the base game content. Marie and Klaus Fischer were the primary focus, and as a result, the others kinda got lost in the shuffle. Like, honestly, after playing the Final Reich, what could you tell me about Jefferson? Or Olivia, for that matter? I bet you're blanking, huh? Don't worry, you're not alone. However, this is no longer really an issue. All of the characters get more depth this time around, but as with the Final Reich and Black Ops 3 season, one character gets the spotlight, and that's Drosten Hind. We get to learn about his previous life as a humanities professor, his reluctant time spent working for the Nazis on the island, and his wife and newborn child back home. Wait, was that even in the map? I also really liked seeing these four grow together as a team. At the start of the map, none of them really want to be there, and would rather just go home and hope the problem resolves itself. But as the map progresses, they all become invested in stopping Straub themselves, and make the decision to actively hunt him down as they stow away on his Zeppelin and head to Germany as a team. It's not as powerful as seeing Premise come together throughout Black Ops 3, but I'll admit that I might have a slight bias, to put it lightly. Now that we've gone over the big things I liked, just like the last video, let's go over the little things. The beach defense intro. I've been waiting almost 7 goddamn years for a map to have a special intro like Moon, and by God it's finally here. In solo, it's a bit underwhelming since all the zombies simply shuffle towards you, but in co-op, they all sprint and it's pretty awesome. Despite the fact that their inclusion makes me angrier than John Bernthal's Punisher, the escorts do not take friendly fire damage or stray away from their intended path, unlike the ones from Gorod Krogan. These are admitted improvements that I feel deserve some praise. Reluctant praise, but praise nonetheless, I guess. The 2 new wall weapons. I love the M1A1 carbine and sawed-off shotgun, so it's nice to see them no longer relegated to being starter weapon exclusives. If you fail to kill a bomber in the mining tunnels, you only take 20 points of damage, whereas normally you take 80. This completely eliminates potentially cheap deaths, provided you have some Geistshot, of course. The doors, wall weapons, and mystery box on the island all have special locks where the player inserts their Electroschnell, thus canonically explaining locked items and how they're opened. Dr. Straub makes a Return of the Jedi reference.
I'm afraid the island defenses will be quite operational when your friends arrive.
I have no idea why anybody wrote this in, but they got a chuckle out of me. And lastly, the addition of 12 new special characters. Sure, they're just recolors of the game's launch characters, but it's nice to have some challenges for the really dedicated players. Although I gotta admit, I'm pretty disappointed there's no new bad agents or bad elites. Like, they have the coolest base game design, why not give them some cool new variants?
How about this? Yeah, I love a man-eater in uniform. Does that do anything for you, idiot? Look at me. Nothing. I'm fucking gorgeous, yo!
Now that we've gone through what I liked about the Darkest Shore, it's time for the part where you think people would stop calling me a fanboy, but here we are. It's time for the stuff I didn't like. When people critique the Darkest Shore, easily the most commonly discussed element is the lack of content compared to the Final Reich. And I can sympathize with this critique. For comparison, the Final Reich had the Tesla gun, its 4 upgrade quests, the Red Talon Claymore, and 2 separate quest paths. But don't get it twisted, there was a lot you could do in the Final Reich. There wasn't a lot you had to do. This is what really prevents me from loving maps like Origins and Zetsubo no Shima. Every game there's that checklist of stuff you borderline have to do for a good game. The Final Reich gives you the option to do this busy work, but at no point, apart from powering on the bunker, does it force it on you. Now thankfully, the Darkest Shore continues this trend, but doesn't offer nearly as much as its precursor in terms of gameplay variety. That's not to say that the map is completely barren and there's nothing to do whatsoever. There's the buildable saw weapon, the Überschnell infused saw, a little side quest to upgrade it via the Übersprengen, the main quest, and shit. Yet another commonly discussed issue with the map is the balance of the new enemy type, the Moishla. Earlier on in the video, I praised them for their genuinely unsettling vibe, and said that they didn't ruin gameplay per se, but I won't bullshit you either. I personally feel that they're slightly broken. Well, okay, maybe broken's too harsh a word, unbalanced. Yeah, that's nicer. And for those who think I'm over-exaggerating and that I just need to get good, let me list off their abilities real quick. They're much smarter than the average zombie and will actively make an attempt to flank you, A single Moishla has the power to dish out up to 170 damage in under 3 seconds. This is enough to take out a single pointed Geist Child from max health. Or, if there's 2 Moishlas in play, enough to kill you nearly instantly. Speaking of which, multiple Moishlas can spawn in at once, even in solo play. Their movement speed is significantly faster than a standard zombie. They don't obey the rules of certain specials like Sustain Zone. And finally, Jack-in-the-Boxes only temporarily distract them. All of this, combined with the fact that they have the health of like 46 Brenners, adds up to a slightly problematic enemy that throws the meta for a loop. Sure, he can occasionally be forced into a retreat from taking too much damage, but unlike the Wusling's Enragement, it's incredibly inconsistent. I can't tell you how many times I've laid into it with everything I had, and they just don't stop coming, and they don't stop coming, and they don't stop coming, and they don't stop coming. I personally like the idea of fighting a smarter type of zombie that's pretty hard to take down, since I found the Brenner to be kind of a pushover.
Anyone want to
I don't see him. God damn it.
But in execution, I feel the end product is a slight misfire in an otherwise incredibly well-balanced enemy pool. Okay, so I feel like I need to add a little addendum here. If you use a very specific mod and weapon combo, you can actually one-hit kill a Moishla. You need to take frontline with Vicious and hand-to-hand, then just charge at them with your Saw. I didn't find this, by the way. That credit goes to Glitching Queen, I think. So yeah, they're kind of unbalanced, but if you're willing to alter your loadout entirely, you can deal with them easily. Okay, back to the video. The changes made to the notebook system. This is a big one for me personally. Despite the fact that I'm quite good at these games at this point, I still appreciated the addition of the notebook guide system in the Final Reich and its prologue. It was such a breath of fresh air to be given a guide instead of having to go on YouTube and look at a 45-minute long video just to turn on power. But now that it no longer lists your current objectives, I feel the game has lost a little bit of what made it unique, and that this change may alienate some casual players. Honestly though, no matter what the team did regarding the mechanic, it's a losing battle. If you keep it, you risk pissing off people who feel that it makes the game too handholdy, and on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have a reaction similar to mine. I do not envy the job of game designers in the slightest. The main quest. I'm on record saying that I loved the Final Reich's quest, apart from the Zeppelin step. The steps made sense, didn't require you to do a bunch of heavy lifting, and even without the notebook, most players could probably still figure out what to do. And then we get to this map. And it's not great. Which is a damn shame because it starts off really good. The first step involves getting the head of Red Riding Hood to open up the corpse gate. And you know what, let's talk about this thing real quick. Creating a lock that only opens through ripping apart a resurrected corpse is fucking twisted beyond belief. Yet I can't help but love it. And the execution, pun completely intended by the way, of the unlocking IGC is wonderfully done. When I first saw it, I thought the body would just explode into a bloody mist because of how models tend to work in these games, and it's admittedly easier to spam a blood effect over, actually putting work into something. But I was wrong. Boy, was I. Then after that, we get a cameo appearance from the Brenner,
Anyone want to Arby?
only to immediately have to fight off a squadron of Stukas with flak cannons, and sink the incoming German warships.
Got it.
These steps are all great. So how could this go wrong? Oh, yep, escort missions are back. I don't think I can accurately convey to you with words how much I hate these. Not just in this map, but in every game ever. They sucked in Infection, they sucked even more somehow in Gorod Krovi, and they suck here, especially the one where you have to lead the Woosling around the map and perk him up. I've had runs where I hug the wall so much that I feel like I'm becoming part of it, but he'll still go for stamina up and ruin the entire thing. So then I have to wait until he dies, get another charged Woosling spine, and try again, only for it to happen again. These escorts are a massive misfire in an otherwise well-designed main quest that honestly makes me not even want to bother with the... Okay, here we go. Meister Moishla, I think I said it right, fight. It's a really cool fight, but by that point I'm so annoyed from the escort missions that I just want to go lie down and sleep for a couple weeks.
That's pretty bleak, dude. It's just a video game.
And finally, as much as I love the story, background lore, and increased character focus, I'd be remiss in mentioning the few flaws I have with it. For starters, the lack of an emotional connection. Despite the increased character interactions, I don't feel as emotionally involved in the quest this time around. The final Reich had Marie fighting to save her brother and her ultimate failure to do so. This felt a bit more grounded and relatable, whereas in The Darkest Shore, we don't really get something like this. But what personally bugs me more is that the voice deliveries are still kinda hit or miss. David Tennant and Udo Kier, the latter of which I didn't really talk about all that much last time, are still easily the strongest performers. Catherine Winnick and Elodie Young, I said it right this time, have improved since the last map, but unfortunately they still have a few clunkers in there. And the most disappointing, like last time, is Ving Rhames' Jefferson.
You've got to be kidding me!
The material he's given this time is actually quite good, but I feel that he's either miscast, not all that into the role, or just hasn't been given proper direction. He's not bad per se, but I feel that he's lacking compared to the other 4 main players. To round this section off, just like with the positives, I have some little things to mention that I don't think really warrant an entire paragraph. These range from legitimate problems to really silly nitpicks. Alright, let's go. Moishless can spawn during the fire room step. This is absolute nonsense. The Pack-a-Punch camo barely shows up on your guns in this map. If I had to guess, I'd say the camo's material doesn't have use gameplay intensity ticked off. The fact that they reused this exact same take in the intro. The Sons of Nerthus statues reuse the gridiron ball anims. This just looks silly, especially the fact that it retains the ADS mechanic of the Brenner head. Like, why? Why would you do this? The fall from the secret chamber is just high enough for you to take fall damage. So theoretically, if you exited in a hurry with no Geistchild, this can result in a cheap and completely unavoidable death. Jefferson's grease gun has ridiculously exaggerated recoil, muzzle flash, and sound. I can't help but think he was supposed to be holding a shotgun or some other high-power weapon at some point. And lastly, Marie's Uberschnau clips directly through her arm in the outro. Oof. So, in conclusion, while I do think it's a very good map that makes some marked improvements over the Final Reich, I feel that The Darkest Shore is overall a bit of a come down. There's nowhere near as many gameplay options, and the balance of the Moishla is questionable at best. Despite this, I still feel that it has the strongest map lore in Zombies history that actually takes some unexpected turns, a wonderfully creepy atmosphere, and solid map design. I also personally really appreciate the increased character focus, despite the fact that there was no real emotional hook this time around. The main problem I and a lot of other players seem to have, like I mentioned before, is the fact that there's just not all that much to do. If there were more side objectives or buildables like the Final Reich, we easily would have had another home run on our hands. But as it stands, we still have a really solid triple, which is nothing to scoff at. Here's hoping the DLC season can keep up this perfect batting average. Baseball joke. Well, that's all for today. At the top of the video, I promised I'd address this whole done with YouTube thing. So, here we go. I was burnt out and I needed a break. Plain and simple. Let's also address the recent tonal shift. As my longtime viewers know, a lot of my older content is very negative and uses that as a primary source of comedy. Sure, the videos might have been funny, but that negativity started bleeding into my real life and my personality. So that's why going forward, I'm going to try and be as positive and constructive as I possibly can be. Let me also clarify. This isn't going to be a full, I'm back, let's make a ton of videos kind of thing. I'm just going to make stuff when inspiration strikes, and ultimately return to YouTube just being a hobby. What does that mean exactly? Well, that means that the next video could be tomorrow, it could be 6 months from now.
Stay tuned.
Anyway, thank you for watching, have a great day, and hopefully I'll see you soon.